Welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. I am Cassandra, your organic beauty, positive mind management, and endocannabinoid mentor. And today we have an interview with Peter Splashenberg. And don't get me, I'm going to probably pronounce that wrong a million times. So we're just going to call him Peter for today. And I really want to welcome to the podcast. And I want you to kind of just go down deep inside, maybe even close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to sense and feel your immediate ecosystem. And then stretch the ecosystem outside of you and feel the energy of how many people are actually quite miserable and work meaningless hours at a job that they don't like, or are on possible sleep medications, on pharmaceuticals. And they're just trying to escape this mundane everyday life. And as our life force fades, we feel lethargic, depressed, and even dissatisfied and disassociated with our very existence. And so this reality may not be recognized unless we're walking this newer path and this enlightened path. And we are all light beings, and we are all created by light, and we emit light. And so when we understand that we're not just primitive beings, we can understand how to live a more fulfilled life. And so again, welcome to the Awaken Beauty podcast. And today, after I became aware of Peter's documentary, In the Beginning, There Was Light, I am seeing the evidence of standing outside of this inner linear mind construct and tapping back into the historic and ancient credibility and proof of how the quality of our energetic frequencies is not only life altering, but a critical area in our lives to foster our health, longevity, and these stressful and challenging times. So we will discuss Peter's fascinating documentary today, which explores how people can live for weeks, months, and even years without food or fluids. And we're going to talk about so much more, including the fountain of youth and what Peter's now doing. So before I welcome on Peter, I'm going to give you a brief bio. Now, Peter is a graduate with honors from the renowned University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna. And in the 1900s, his interest in transpersonal psychology led him to an intensive practice of yoga and meditation. Peter had a personal encounter in the spring of 2000, which awakened his interest in the topic of breatharianism. He met a meditation teacher who allegedly had not eaten for more than a year. Still skeptical, he started a 10-year journey of research from around the globe on this topic, searching for traces of evidence and skeptical scrutiny of this human mystery. So over 200 hours of footage were edited into 90 minutes, featuring the documentary In the Beginning, There Was Light. And so I want to give a big welcome to Peter. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Cassandra. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for everybody watching. And I'm looking forward to talk about life energy and breatharianism and intermittent fasting and the Fountain of Youth, my latest book that I just published in Austria. And yeah, it's about intermittent fasting and how we get younger and healthier, but we will speak about that later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when I first found your documentary, I think everybody is skeptical, and I think it can be a very controversial conversation. But kind of what I opened up with, when we really understand light energy and we really understand what energy is, it actually makes quite a lot of sense. But there's a lot of practice and a lot of discipline that has allowed these individuals in your documentary to be able to do what they do. So I think to start off the podcast, can you just share a little bit about what awakened you to really make a documentary, really take all this time out of your life that you thought this message was so important? Can you kind of frame up the documentary and kind of how you went through this process and really what awakened you to share this with the world?
Absolutely. So like everybody else, I was completely skeptical about this idea of breatharianism. And I saw in the mid of 1990s, I saw a documentary about the Swiss national saint. And it is said he did not eat and drink for the last 20 years of his life. And of course, I also thought this is Catholic myth or something like that. But in the year 2000, I met a meditation teacher and I learned a special meditation technique from him. And from other students, I heard that, do you know that this guy does not eat? And I asked him, is this true? And then he gave me a very surprising answer. He said, yes, for the last year, he only drank water. And it sounded quite profound and honest, but on the other hand, I thought, okay, if this is true, why aren't there dozens of scientific studies, and why is this phenomenon not known in the media and so on? So I started private research first. So there was no idea of making a film about this. And so I saw that this idea of breatharianism is not something that came up in the 1990s by some esoterics, but this phenomenon is known by different names all over the world. We have it with Catholic saints, we have it with Qigong masters in China, with yogis in India. So this is something known all over the world, and there is also a long history of skeptical scrutiny, and there's a lot of historical evidence, and there is also evidence that was found in the last 10 and 20 years. I also have to say, don't get me wrong, this film is not about motivating anybody to do this. So I really have to warn of doing this yourself. It's good to do intermittent fasting and experience the positive energy that you get from a few days of fasting, or perhaps 2 or 3 weeks of fasting. But here we are talking about people that claim that they did not eat for years. And that, of course, is for a normal person dangerous. Yeah. And a few people died because they tried to do this. So be careful with this. And what I want to do with my film is not motivating anybody to do this, but to question this idea that we are nothing more than combustion engines. That's the classical idea of science, how we work, that we burn energy. And the thing what I want to address is that life energy is the biggest mystery we have on this planet. Science cannot produce one single living cell out of dead matter. So the big question is, how is the energy coming into the body? And that is the question I'm asking with this film. My film is questioning this mechanistic, materialistic idea, or I would better say ideology, that we are educated into in school, and that is really nothing like a tale that was invented in the 18th century, but that is no longer holding up to reality. And that's really the interesting question. What is life energy, and how is the energy coming into the body? And here comes also the idea of the calorie myth up. In my latest book, I also address this idea of the calorie myth, because a lot of people still think that we are just nourished by calories. And if we look at the human energy balance, we see that doesn't work. And everybody who ever tried to lose weight by counting calories knows it does not work. Everybody knows people who eat a lot and don't gain weight, and there are others who hardly eat and they stay the same. And the funny thing is that this is not only anecdotal evidence, but we have a lot of scientific evidence showing this. If you are looking at the human energy balance, in the 1980s, there was published a big scientific study about the human energy balance, showing that in completely normal people, so not talking about breatharians, but people like you and me, up to 23% of the energy you cannot explain calorically. It's coming out of thin air, literally.
Right.
And only classical science has a problem with that.
Yep.
In the Chinese medical traditions, they know this. They say that life energy, of course, comes into the body via breathing and via the food, but you also receive life energy, qi, how it's called in China, directly via the skin. And that there is a lot of potential you have to get more direct energy from qi. So in China, they call breatharianism bigu fu qi, which means without bread, directly through qi. So this is nothing new, actually. It's just something we have to discover again. And science, we can talk about this later, that we now have scientific evidence and indications how the energy comes into the body. But
yeah, I think you're right on as far as, and this goes back to ancient principles and the human scientific mind trying to put, common sense to some things that you just can't scientifically explain. Because if we go back to the very essence, and I love the name of your documentary, and in the beginning there was light, and there was, the ethos, which God spoke into being. And so there was this very essence that spoke life into being, which in my mind is life essence became the very catapult of creating life. And so while there was this one essence that started the creation of life, those that imparted in life also contribute and create life. And so I do biofeedback services for clients. And so I do personalized services where I am capturing scalar energy, voice technology, and I'm bringing that into a device where I really love this topic, because we can really receive nutrients from all different kind of waveforms. And so if we're all wavelengths at very different, various degrees of speed, which makes up matter, it really breaks down how different wavelengths can actually bring us nutrition and nutrients in different kinds of means. So for a listener listening, well, what does that mean? So if I can read that somebody is deficient in vitamin B or C, or has other imbalances in their energetic, in their energy, I can then bring in and give them the frequency of that nutrient. So what's so incredible about that is that we can pull apart pathogens, and we can put neurotransmitters and vitamins together via energetic resources. And so this is where I think that, to me, it's not so mind-boggling, because if you're really, really at that very, very highest state of consciousness, and that you are in full belief, your mind, your body, and soul are one with light, truth, and the essence of light, you're actually getting this reciprocal response of life itself, if that makes sense. So, it's so interesting how the scientific world tries to break it down with a calorie in, calorie out, but that really throws that whole thing out. Now, to your point, we're not saying don't eat, but you have to be, I think, at this higher level of consciousness to be able to understand that you bring in this essence of life, and how do you bring that in is the process. And that's becoming higher state in consciousness, I think, is the first move in that. So I think that's all incredible. Now, going into your documentary, one thing that I noted here is if I look at your breatharianism, and if we look at the context of the concept of how it supports longevity, I break it down in 3 ways. And this kind of goes into what you are now moving into, which is intermittent fasting, which really kind of catapults off of, well, how can this create better health, really, if that this obsession with emotional eating or calories or always having to have food by us, this constant state of stress. And so I break it down into, if we can take this modern day example of breatharianism and then break it down in intermittent fasting, which fosters autophagy, it's known to actually build muscle. And it's also known to prevent Alzheimer's and slow aging and allow the body to heal faster. So maybe walk us into then where you are at now and kind of how this led you down to this fascination of intermittent fasting, which is all the rage right now. And really kind of outline maybe your book and how you go through this in your new book.
Yeah. So first of all, the idea of my movie is that we are all living on light. That we have to understand. Everybody is a wonder. Every single living cell is a wonder. And the funny thing is that every single living cell has a little light. That's the light of life. And scientifically, it's called biophotons. And in these biophotons, there is the light transports information. And
Right.
so we are information beings. And one of the professors I interviewed, Professor Fritz Albert Popp, said that if we are breaking down, for example, the chemical formula of sugar, it disappears into water and carbon dioxide. What stays is the information, the light. So this is something I use in my book to help people to free their mind that they have to burn calories all the time. Because, you know, when we speak about intermittent fasting, it's like 16 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. So it's no problem at all. But still people think, oh, I have to get something because I need energy. No. Not in these 16 hours. It's really a big relief for the body.
Right.
And how I came in contact with intermittent fasting before I knew the name. So when making these interviews in the beginning, there was interviewed a lot of doctors and professors and specialists for nutrition and physiology and so on. And in the 2000s, nearly every single professor and doctor said to me, fasting is either useless or dangerous. There was only one professor at the University Clinic of Salzburg. They had a special institute for very fringe aspects of medicine. And he told me by then about this phenomenon of autophagy that won the Nobel Prize in 2016. For me, it's still now very funny that by then nearly none of the medical professors knew about this, because it came out of molecular biology.
Yep.
And so this professor told me how good it is for health if you fast for, then it was 12 to 14 hours. So in 2008, I started with this. Later on, they said it's better 16 hours. And better than 16 hours is 18 hours or 20 hours. But what happens? If you fast for 12, 14, 16 hours, in the cells, there starts this phenomenon of autophagy, which means eating yourself. But the cell does not start to eat itself, but it starts to clean all the rubbish in the cell. And now there is really a lot of evidence that if you do this intermittent fasting, you can prevent, like you told, Alzheimer, cancer, and also the cells are rejuvenated and they age less. So that's the reason why our book is called The Fountain of Youth Effect. And so it's important to understand that nutrition is good for us on one side because it's nourishing us on the physical level, but we also have to understand that it is nourishing us on an emotional level.
Right.
That's why we have stress eating, for example. So we have to make a difference between these two aspects of food. Because the big amounts of sweet and fat and heavy meals we eat for our emotional body, because our physical body would be happier with a lot less and different stuff. So it's important to address the emotional aspect of our being. And that's why we use in our book not only the knowledge from biology and from medicine, but we also use meditation. We use mental techniques because it's important that it works easy. If we think in terms of fasting, that it's something that is difficult and that it's not funny, then it is not funny and it is difficult. But if we understand that fasting is something that is cleaning me, that gives me more energy because I receive energy, I'm getting lighter. If I have these ideas in my mind when I think about fasting, then it's very easy. And I really can say that in these more than 10 years that I'm doing it, I enjoy the fasting. I enjoy eating as well. But we have to understand, and that is another important message I want to give with my book and with my film, we are not machines. In the last 200-300 years, we always got this idea that we are meat machines. Yep. And there is a huge difference between machines and organisms. Machines work as long as they have fuel, electricity, they work and work and work until one part is broken. Organisms, they work in rhythms, in cycles. We have to sleep, we are awake, we have to eat, we have to digest. Yeah. So there is a big difference, and we have to understand that we have to give ourselves this freedom of fasting, because there is an abundance of food drugs around us.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really big point, is that, you know, there's all different kinds of outputs that are coming into us at all times, whether that's a dinging phone or, you know, go back to the 30s after, you know, or go back to the 50s here in the US when convenience was made through Campbell's soup. You know, and it became a luxury that you could get everything out of a can and then you could put it in the microwave. And, you know, so we're always being positioned to, and I think there's all different kinds of ways and stressors that can inhibit and, you know, bless the body, you know. And so if we look at different stressors, autophagy can be a stressor on the body, but done correctly, it can actually give life, put you in a better situation. So I really liked where you went with the mental and the mindset is you have to understand the ends, you know, always have the end in mind of why am I doing this and what is my pursuit? You know, and this goes back to the beginning of the podcast, so that I can be a higher conscious person, so that I'm not living in my emotional body, but I'm one of discipline. I'm one of focus when those things want to come back in, or that addiction wants to come back in, that I can sustain the control of my organism as a human living organism being that's beyond just a, like you said, a machine. I eat, I go to sleep, you know, and I think then that leaps into, maybe you want to talk into this a little bit about how this actually can even relate to, you know, the biophotons, which relates to, it's kind of a big thing with chronobiology right now in our sleep patterns, and going back to the organism, because, you know, back even in historic biblical times, they fasted a lot. It was a part of their lifestyle. And so, you know, when we go to sleep, if we're on blue lights at night, and then we're sleeping in and we're not getting that first morning sun, the autophagy in the brain, that's when the lymphatic system in the brain is able to detox itself. So the body knows how to function. It knows how to be an organism in these, you know, the algorithm of life and an algorithm of chronobiology and all of this. But I think that even can go into what you're speaking about as being an organism. We have these circadian rhythms, and, you know, we really function ourselves as what we've been told and how much protein we need and macro and micronutrients, and we get all anxious about it. Then you throw the emotional body on it, and it's just a big mess. But I really love your book and I really love the Fountain of Youth, because it's really aspiring marketing, because we all aspire to live our longest, most optimal life. That's really what this is. This is not about looking younger or being skinny. This is so that you can feel great, be great, have all the energy that you want and need, so that you can live a life of purpose and from success to significance. And that's what this kind of fundamental peace and lifestyle can actually give us, now that we know, of jumping off the addiction and getting onto the life train, you know?
Absolutely. We have to understand that our cells are renewed every 7 years completely. So I'm now 50 and I'm completely new compared to when I was 40. It's incredible.
And you look like you're 35, Peter.
Thanks a lot. And there are trees that are thousands of years old and they still produce leaves that look like the tree, a 30-year-old tree. Right. So we have to understand that in principle, it would be possible that we live very long. So aging is in principle an mechanism that was produced by nature for species that have sexual reproduction, because it's good for mankind if we not live forever. But as an individual, of course, it's okay if I do everything that I stay healthy and young. And we have to understand that we age faster if our DNA is corrupted, and it's corrupted by information. And now we are coming back to the biophotons. What do these biophotons do? The sun emits order, coherent information. And in the plants and indirectly in the animals, this order is conserved. And we eat that. And it's what Fritz Albert Popp says, what stays is the light. So most important is this information. And Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California, I asked him about this idea of breatharianism and how this could be related to consciousness. And he says, consciousness is an ordering principle. If this ordering principle leaves the body, it quickly falls apart in its uninteresting material substances, the dust, like the Catholic Church says. So we have to understand that it is this holy order, this coherence that is stored in the life energy, in these subtle energies, in the light of life, in the biophotons. But of course, we receive this energy from the outside by eating food, for example, or by going into nature. But we also have the chance to create this order from the inside. It's the inner light, what we do with meditation, for example. And why do we have to sleep? I mean, science still does not know why we have to sleep, because our body is working all the time. Mm-hmm. And one explanation is we have to sleep that our body can work peacefully, because we are creating so much disorder all the time. So it's necessary that we relax and the body can work in peace. And what we do is in meditation that we create a connection to this, however we call it, transcendental area, divine area, where we have perfect order, perfect peace. And in nature, of course, if we have if we have fresh food, there is a lot of order in it. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, we are confronted with food that is completely processed, and where we created a lot of disorder. And I interviewed Professor Dr. Paul Clayton. He is counseling the British government concerning nutrition. And he says, we have a huge problem with chronic inflammation worldwide. And this chronic inflammation creates all these civilization diseases and creates faster aging. And what is the reason for that? It's the processed food. Mm-hmm.
I think inflammation can come from all different aspects. And I think,
of course,
people are dying of chronic disease today. They're not dying of old age. And this goes back to inflammation. And that's what, to your point with aging, that's what aging is. It's inflammation. at a chronic state for an extended amount
Exactly.
of time.
Yeah, I mean, inflammation can be useful, but there's
Right.
a difference to chronic inflammation.
Right.
And this is extreme stress of the body. And it has also to do, for example, with a lot of uh, positive ions.
Yep.
I mean, this is now addressing another idea in my book. This is now research I found after the film was released. I got in 2013, I got an email from Professor Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington. And he
Yeah.
said he heard about my movie, and if you can see it, and he really liked it. And then he said, I have an explanation how this could work, how the energy comes into the body. And he said, it's our body water. At the University of Washington, I don't know if you know this research.
Yeah, I've gone through some of his research on how
Okay.
the negative ion enters the
Exactly.
water output.
So this was really the missing link in my research. But because when you remember the interviews I made in the Wudang Mountains in China, when I interviewed these Bigu masters, and they said you should practice Bigu, so the Chinese version of breatharianism, only where the chi fields are ordered, so not in cities, and where there are a lot of negatively charged ions. And at that moment, I didn't understand that. I understood this idea of the ordered chi fields, but I did not understand why a Kung Fu master, a Bigu master in the middle of China was talking about negatively charged ions. And finally, with the research of Professor Pollack, I understood, because our body water is very special. It has a different chemical formula. It's not H2O, but H3O2. So
Right.
there is, so it's negatively charged, and it can receive a radiation from the outside. And nature is negatively charged. So when we go into the woods, we receive charge. And there is also a Clint Ober, for example, in the United States. He is the pioneer of grounding. And he says you should go barefoot to receive this energy. And there is now there are also a few scientific studies about that if you ground yourself, chronic inflammation goes back. So nature is literally nourishing us, not only via food,
right,
but by going into nature. In Japan, they have now an official therapy called Shinrin Yoku. That's it's wood bathing. And because in these big cities in Japan, they are so they are so departed from nature that just going for a few hours into a wood is healing them. And they saw when they looked at the blood that only by going half an hour into a wood, the immune system is going up. And you see this in the blood cells. And if you stay one day in a wood, your immune system is charged for 30 days. So connecting with nature is really important, because we receive life energy from nature, and we also receive life energy from within by meditation. I mean, I love meditation. I'm doing meditation now for nearly 20 years now, twice a day, without ever leaving it out once, because it's so good for me. And there, if you look up at Google, probably you know it, there are so many studies that meditation is good for mind, soul, and body, as well as for addictive eating behavior. Right. And that's the reason why it's also in our book, because if we get nourished from within emotionally, then we do not need all these food drugs, because it's literally food drugs. If you look at brain scan of somebody who eats sugar and somebody who uses cocaine, it nearly looks the same. It's the dopamine. Yes. And we are surrounded by things that create a dopamine rush. I mean,
Right.
whatever, if you use Facebook or sex or drugs or food. So
Yeah.
it's really important to get this under control.
Yeah, I love where you went with the positive and negative ions and Dr. Polak's and Professor Polak's research and how you kind of connected those pieces together before grounding was ever really a thing as well. So you really are pioneering three different sectors here. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Semina. Have you heard of Semina sleep system?
No, no.
Okay, well, you should look them up. They are actually an Austrian company, and they really are the first that pioneered before the grounding company came out, is a complete grounding sleep system. And I mean, to the nth to max, where they've got magnets within the system and the wood foundation. And so it's more than just a mat, it's an entire ecosystem in the whole biology of sleep. And, you know, this is where I think also then you can stretch this kind of science into is, you know, how can we get that into our sleep? And, you know, to your point with sleep, why do we sleep? Well, I do think that it's a detoxification system. I think it's a consciousness, you know, unification for the mind and the body and the soul as well. But the negative, this negative piece, I'm just kind of thinking that I really need to transform my spa into the Japanese wood treatments. Cause I mean, this will be amazing if you can just charge yourself, you know, and help your health within, how long was the treatment? Did you say 30 minutes? An hour?
You can measure it after 30 minutes.
After 30 minutes.
The T cells, they go up within 30 minutes. You also see that cholesterol is going down, so the stress hormone, and it's used for a lot of illnesses now, also depression, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Because the trees, they emit special substances. They communicate.
Yep.
And when we breathe that in, it's very good for us. And
Yep.
I mean, we are just now talking about biochemical things.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many subtle things we still don't understand. It's just the wisdom of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about connecting nature, and we get help connecting with ourselves, connecting with our fellow man, and connecting with nature, and we are happy.
Yeah, I used to have a salon in inner city Minneapolis, and it was always busy. You know, it was on a very busy street and highway, and it was so chaotic. And 6 years in, I just had to get out, and I moved my salon out to beautiful Lake Minnetonka, where I'm right on the water, and there are trees, and I can go for a walk every single night after work, so I can ground myself and really just interpret my day in a whole different manner. And I just feel like I'm an entirely different person. So this energetic, cohesive and coherent relationship that we have with nature was something that we were meant to live with. And we've totally isolated ourselves with our shoes. We never ground. We're inside. We're toxic lights all the time. Now we have EMF saturation. And really, if I really think about my day, even when I try to even put effort into this, I'm not the most profound biohacker on my aspired list, but we really have to be mindful and really put together a life plan so that we can get these essential parts of how we are meant to live with nature back into our life, because we're totally cut off.
Yeah.
Totally cut off.
Yeah.
So
That's why our society is so sad and depressed in a way, because we lost ourselves, because we are distracted all the time. We lost connection with nature, and we lose connection with the other people, because we always said that we are disconnected from them, and we have to look that it's good, everything is good for us. And I think this is the new paradigm that really can help and heal our society, that we are all connected. And if we really feel that, and we then we will change our way of living, and all the problems we have will disappear. And meditation and connection with nature is really doing a lot in this.
connection with nature and connection with individuals. We're not present in our lives. And when we learn to be conscious and present and outward focused and be service to others and be present with people when we're with them, that again, to your point, you know, breatharianism, that's a light that is given from the other person. That's an auric field that gives life to the other person and also brings life back into ourselves. So there's this whole ecosystem, which is so fascinating because it's what we were born into. It's what we lived in. It's what we lived off of. And we've complicated it so much by the human mind because only humans can think, right? And we try to solve problems. And you and I are both entrepreneurs, so we like to bring solutions. But I really love bringing it back to what you've really showcased today with autophagy and, you know, enlightenment as life itself. And we really start to deconstruct how we've been put into this you know, really automatons and told what to believe. When we start to deconstruct all of that, we actually come to life. And when we step outside of the matrix, and that's what you're doing with your new book, and that's what you've done with your documentary. Can you share a little bit about where you can find both the documentary? I know the book, we're wanting to bring that into the US. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So my documentary in the beginning, there was Light. You can watch at lightdocumentary.com via Vimeo on demand, or you can order the DVD. And it's also, you can also stream it on Gaia, the Netflix for spiritual people. And yes, my book, it's very successful here in Europe, especially in the German-speaking countries. Here in Austria, we are the best-selling book of 2019, the best-selling nonfiction book. We were 17 weeks #1.
Awesome.
At the hit list now again, #1. And yeah, it would be great if we could bring it to the US. There is a translation. So if somebody's out there who knows an editor or a publisher, so perhaps you can make
a lot of marketing connections and authors and publishers. So I'll definitely put that out there. And I mean, who wouldn't want to take the rights on of the Fountain of Youth? And
yeah,
autophagy is the new hit thing. Now, I do want to just say one thing about autophagy, and this goes back to obviously breatharianism is, you know, we're not telling you not to go eat. Obviously, please advise medical advice. Same with autophagy and intermittent fasting. So I own an organic salon. I have an organic product line for hair and skin. And one thing I have noticed is that, you know, women that do this practice or they do the fasting, best intentions in mind, but I really do advise that individuals really do it with either a functional medicine practitioner or someone that really knows what they're doing. Capture the wisdom that Peter is talking about today. Get that fuel for your fire of understanding that you can do this and that it actually brings you life. But obviously, you know, I've seen women lose their hair quite quickly, lose the weight and then put it back on because they haven't addressed the emotional piece. And as a clinical hypnotherapist, that's something that, you know, the subconscious body is very, very real. And so I think that before you start doing things like this, know that it will bring things up in your presence and your consciousness that you will have to address as you go about this journey. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I also think, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more with your research, you know, intermittent fasting is incredible especially for women after menopause and are kind of into that later phases. A little bit more careful for women that are younger than 35 or wanting to become pregnant, things of that nature with all the hormonal issues that we already have with endocrine disruptors and things of that nature. Can you advise that a little bit as far as, you know, any words of caution or specific people or groups that you found it's been most successful with?
So the 16/8 fasting, everybody who is healthy can do this.
Okay.
So if you have problems with low weight or anything, of course, be dangerous and visit a health practitioner. But if you are healthy, you can do 16 hours fasting without any problems. And we have to keep in mind, I interviewed Professor who is a specialist in intermittent fasting. And we have to think about this, that if you look back at the history of mankind, we were confronted with times of fasting all the time.
Yeah.
Our body is completely used to fasting for 1 day, 3 days, 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of strategies to deal with little food. What we cannot deal with is 3 meals a day and snacking in between.
Mm-hmm.
That is our bodies don't have strategies for this. And that's the reason why the World Health Organization is saying that 4.4 billion people worldwide suffer from too much food.
Yep.
So, of course, still people are starving. But the biggest problem we have nowadays is that we have too much food. And
Yep.
another paradigm change that happened in the last 4 to 10 years is that nutrition science in the past always was thinking about what we eat, but it's more important when we eat.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we create these times of autophagy in our body, it's possible to clean ourselves, and we are then able to get rid of some sins, of some nutrition sins,
Right.
that would be more dangerous if we eat all the time. There is this famous experiment with mice. So they made 2 groups of mice, and they got exactly the same amount of food, the same kind of food, but one group got this food only in a time frame of 8 hours, and the other mice could eat this food all the time, like we do before we go to sleep, and then breakfast in the morning. So when we do not sleep, we eat. And the funny thing was that although they ate exactly the same amount of calories and the same food, the group that only ate in a time frame of 8 hours, they stayed the same weight and healthy, and the other group got overweight and created a form of diabetes. So if we think about this, what does it say? If we get these phases of autophagy in our life, then some nutrition sins that we have in our daily life, they are less dangerous for our bodies.
Well, and not only that, let's think about just the topical and the environmental. As someone in the beauty industry, we're always putting products and things in our skin, which is directly right up to your adipose tissue. And everything is, the emotions are in the tissue, right? And so your emotions are in the tissue, the fat toxins from the food are in the tissue, the environmental toxins are in the tissue. So the more that we can excrete that, squeeze it, pull it out, pull it apart, get it into a water phase, get it through the liver in a safe way, and totally excrete it from the body, we're all for better when we can do that. So, autophagy is not only just, the food premise, but just all of the toxins that we hold in our tissue that have been there for so long, and, this even goes to the antithesis of the light myth, that there are more people with melanoma that get healthy rates of light that have gotten no light at all, that actually are survivors, that are the ones that get more light. So it goes back to the light conversation, that light is life-giving. But when we're binging on light, or we're not getting enough light, that's when the body gets out of homeostasis. And so it goes back to what you said, we're an organism, and we have to respect ourselves as an organism and understand that we're a higher state of consciousness. We are actually much more, we capture more life out of grounding from the actual frequency from the earth, out of frequency of bringing our body back into a healthy frequency, and also allowing our frequency to de-stress from not always putting food down our mouth, or emotionally eating, or attaching some kind of person's guru thing they tell you to do, is just simply what brings us out of homeostasis. So Peter, thank you for your book. Thank you for your documentary. I think it really it really is the essence of going back to nature, going back to life and life source itself. And in the beginning, there was God, and God spoke life. And we are that essence, and I believe that we are that source. And so not only can we tap from that source, but we can also be a source to others. And you've certainly been a source on the Awaken Beauty podcast today. So is there anything else that you would want to share about your book? Now we know that we can find the movie on Gaia, and the book we're going to try to find a publisher here. And one thing I always like to ask at the end of an interview is something personal that you have awakened to in your life. It could be related to what we talked about today. It could be something entirely different. What would that be of something that you've awakened to personally in your life?
So I told you that I meditated a lot, and I did a lot of also long meditations when I did retreats. And really one of the most interesting experiences I had was this really getting a group feeling and really feel that we are connected, that there is group energy, not as something, as some idea and, you know, it would be beautiful, but really feeling it. And that really changed my life. Because, normally we think we are locked in this body, and our mind is locked in the brain. And it's so relieving to know that we are connected, and that really changes everything.
Yeah, and I really, I agree with you. And it's something I've also kind of started feeling as of late too, when you can really extract yourself out of, I think it's an exercise of really getting out of self, right? And starting to tap into those that have the best in mind of wanting to connect with others, so that we can all collectively raise the rising tide, so that all ships can rise together, right?
Yeah.
So it's
And feeling that there's so much peace in ourselves, in everybody. And I mean, that's nothing we have to achieve. It's actually something that is always there. We are just creating disorder all the time. And I mean, Eckhart Tolle says our thoughts are a brain disease, actually, because of course thoughts can be useful, but normally they just create disorder. And what we do in meditation is that we can go through these thoughts and get calm and clear on demand, like Jade Tan says, who does the Google Meditation Academy. And he says the main thing about meditation is calm and clear on demand. And I really enjoy this because, in everyday life, there's so much things that stress us and are horrible, and panic and whatever. And with meditation, you get this calm and clear on demand, and everything is okay. You know, that's the worst thing a situation can give us is pain, but all the suffering is just created in our minds.
Yeah. And, you know, I think your meditation really gives into how you react to the rest of your life. You know, how we perceive life is really in our mind, and it's between our two ears. And so it's all perception, and meditation really brings life back into focus and gets us into alignment with the source and who we are and our authentic self. So wonderful. Peter, you are just incredible. I just really enjoyed today's conversation. You stayed up very late. Why don't you tell the viewers how late it is there for you today?
Now it's 30 minutes before midnight.
Yes. So I'm just so thankful that you could stay up this late, and can't wait to share it with the Awaken podcast listeners. And so hopefully we'll have you back on when you're a top seller here in the US for your new book about autophagy and the fountain of youth. So thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining us on the Awaken Beauty podcast. I am Cassandra, your Awaken Beauty podcast host. And until next time, stay sane, get sleep, and bring your sexy back. Thanks again.
Thanks, Cassandra.